Next up, we have Craig Charney from Charney Research with the session Dangerous, Divided, and Worsening, Public Perceptions of the State of the World and Global Issues. Over to you, Craig.
Okay.
And now you should be able to share screen.
Okay.
So you see the share screen on your
Right.
Yeah.
I switch to slideshow. We have some feedback.
Here's how you turn it on. Yeah.
It's all like now. The room audio. Should be able to do share screen. Working.
Yes. Okay, well, hello, everyone. Today, we're going to look at the public's view of many of the world's leading countries regarding the state of the world. I'll give you a spoiler, it's not good. There's a lot of concerns around the globe, and we'll take a look at them in some detail. Yet, this bad news also contains a kernel of good. The concerns that are reported are largely common concerns. The ways in which they're measured are largely by common measures. What all this means is that we've gone a long ways towards evolving a shared framework for understanding global problems. And a common framework can, in turn, provide a motivation and basis for collective action. But what exactly is the source of this information? Well, this presentation draws on data from what we hope will be the first annual Global Governance Survey, conducted by Charney Research. It's one of the three legs of the Stimson Center's Global Governance Innovation Project. The others are the forthcoming Global Governance Index report. The Bosch Foundation has generously funded this work. Now, the countries that we surveyed are two groups. The G7 or Group of Seven, that is the US, Canada, UK, France, Germany, Italy, and Japan, the leading developed countries, and the so-called BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, the most influential developing countries. This module, which we hope to repeat here annually, shows how the world is doing in aggregate and issue by issue in the eyes of the populations of these countries. And that will form the basis for today's presentation. In May, we'll do another more extensive release on public attitudes towards policies in these countries, including UN reform, conflict resolution, climate action, and pandemics. But that's what we do, what we'll be doing in May. First off, what did this survey involve? Well, this was quite a big poll, 400 people per country in each of 12 countries, for a total sample of 4,800. It was fielded online at the end of January throughout the month of February. We made sure that the results were representative of each country by setting quotas for a sample and then waiting to tweak the results a little bit further. Now, while the countries themselves have representative populations, they also have equal weight in the 12 country data set. That is to say, both big and small populations each have 400 representatives. But there are positives and negatives, strengths and limitations to doing it this way. Now, the survey includes most of the world's population and in GDP as well. And it allows a comparison across developed and developing country blocks. On the other hand, it underrepresents India and China, each of which has more than 1 billion people. And it also underrepresents the less developed and smaller countries, in particular in Africa, Latin America, and the Muslim world. So every time you make a choice on a survey like this, you emphasize some things and you miss out on others. But these are the choices that we made. I hope we'll become more comprehensive. And next year, in fact, we hope we'll be able to survey the G20 or group of 20 countries in 2024. But in 2023, just who did we survey? Well, here we see the respondents as a whole in terms of age, sex, schooling, and media use. By generation, well, boomers like me rule just barely, but closely followed by millennials. And overall, what we see is that just under half of our population are under 40, just over half of those we sampled are over 40. In terms of sex, women slightly outnumber men. Our survey population is overwhelmingly secondary educated, and 1/4 of them have college degrees. And finally, in terms of their sources of news about the world, national TV is by far the biggest, followed by online social media. In short, this is not your grandfather's world, dominated by unschooled peasants dependent on word of mouth. It's an educated, connected world where young and old, women and men are aware of what's going on in the world. With that preface, then, let's look at the findings. Now, I started off by asking an old pollster question that's never been quite posed in this way before. You've probably heard polling in your own country where people have asked, do you think this country is headed in the right direction or the wrong direction? Well, as far as I know, nobody ever asked that question about the world before. So we did, and here's what we found. Most people across the G7 and BRICS countries say the world is headed in the wrong direction, while 30% say it's headed in the right way. 57% say wrong. That's the bar all the way on the left here. Now, you see the individual countries broken out as we go across the panel. And the percentage numbers are the percent in each country who say the world is headed in the wrong direction. As you can see, the only countries where the majorities say things are headed in the right direction are China, where 82% say that, and India, where 64% do. And correspondingly, as you see on the far right, only 23% in India and 11% in China say things are headed the wrong way. And the gloomiest countries are Italy, where 77% say things are headed the wrong way, South Africa, 72%, and France, 71%. Overall, some 13% are unsure of where the world is headed. The uncertainty is highest in Japan at 31%, and not too surprisingly in Russia at 24%. Now, if we compare groups of countries, the BRICS split almost evenly. 43% say right direction, 44% wrong. While the G7 countries, the rich countries, are far gloomier. They're 2/3 say things are headed the wrong way, just 21 right. Why are people so gloomy? Well, overall, the top 3 reasons why people choose wrong direction are war and conflict, cited by 50%, the economy, cited by 38%, and rising corruption, mentioned by 23%. War is the top reason cited in every single country except the US and India, where pessimism focuses on the economy, and China, where corruption and the economy both topple. Other problems pessimists note include climate change, cited by 19%, lack of basic services, 12%, immigration, 11%, lack of international cooperation, 10%, or global leadership, 10% as well, growing anti-democratic forces, mentioned by 9%, weakening rule of law, 7%, and the COVID-19 pandemic, though that, interestingly, is mentioned by only 7%. Now, one important point you can pull out of this is that many of the issues that concern the global public relate to issues with global governance, interstate war, climate, immigration, global health, global cooperation, and leadership. In other words, global things are on people's minds. Now, so much for the pessimists. What makes the minority of optimists hopeful? Well, reasons cited by the minority who say the world is headed the right way include the decline of COVID-19, mentioned by 27%, peace and security, cited by 24%, and economic gains, mentioned by 22%. Next come international factors. People say there is more international cooperation. In 20% of the cases, that there's climate action happening, 19%, and the respondents' country is providing international leadership, 18%. International cooperation displaces COVID as the top reason for optimism in China, 23%, and Italy, 27%. Economic recovery comes first in Japan, while among Russians polled, leadership from their country led by far, 56%, more than any other country. Other factors for hope include better services, mentioned by 17%, rule of law, 16%, immigrant integration, 10%, less corruption, also 10%, and weaker anti-democratic forces. Now, what's interesting is that while these are reasons for greater optimism, what's quite striking is that the factors that are cited, namely COVID, peace, international cooperation, climate action, leadership, immigration, most of these factors also have to do with global issues. In other words, how people perceive action on global issues has a lot to do with their perception of the state of the world. In other words, global performance on governance issues is the key to understanding assessments of global governance, both positive and negative overall. So with that as background, then the next question becomes, what do people think of the handling of global issues? How satisfied are they with what the world has been doing? Well, here we see responses on a series of major issues. There are 9 all told. The blue part of each bar is the portion who say the world is doing well. The orange part is the part that says they don't know. And the gray part is the proportion who say things are headed to hell in a handcart. But as you can see, there's one big issue where people actually think the world has done fairly well. And these again are the responses across all 12 countries. More than 3 in 5, 61%, say that the world has done well in dealing with COVID. And that's the majority view in every country except Japan. The other topic where a plurality is positive is helping refugees, where 48% say a good job has been done, 45% bad. On the other major issues tested, majorities or pluralities say the world is doing poorly on reducing poverty, 62% say that, on peace and security, 57%, on resource conservation for future generations, 55%, climate action, 54%, inclusive governance, 51%, global cooperation, 49%, and human rights, 52%. Now, here too, the BRICS are somewhat more positive. Just besides COVID and refugees, the majority of respondents in the BRICS countries also say the world is doing well on human rights and inclusive governance. We compare them to the past, then have things gotten better or have they gotten worse? Well, here you see data on trends compared to 10 years ago. And our question we asked, think about how the world is doing in each of the following areas compared to 10 years ago. And what we see is that there are a variety of responses. There are 2 where the world seems to be doing better, one where the world is clearly doing better, and that is combating COVID-19. The blue part is the part that says the world is doing better. The orange part, the part that says the world is doing the same, and the gray part, the part that says the world is doing worse. And what we can see here is that on COVID or combating pandemics, the world is better by a margin of 39% to 19%. The world is said to be doing about the same on climate and refugees, 28 to 26, 27 to 26 as well. On the other hand, it's seen as doing worse more often than better on human rights, peace and security, resource conservation for future generations, global cooperation, inclusive governance, and curbing poverty. In other words, on a whole series of major issues, the world is not only seen as doing badly, but it's seen as having lost ground compared to a decade ago. So how do people describe the state of the world overall? We've been looking, at a question of the direction of the world. We've also looked at how it's doing on individual issues. But if you ask people in a more open-ended way, what do they say? Well, here what you see is a word cloud. When we asked people which of 10 words they would use to describe the current state of the world. And the size of the words are the responses they gave. Well, these choices speak for themselves. The most common responses were dangerous, divided, and worsening, which gave us the title for today's presentation. And after that, followed up chaotic. Nothing else really registered. But we can take a closer look at what proportion gave each response on the next slide. What you can see is that the top selection was divided, 35%, followed by dangerous, 32%, and worsening, 30%. Next came chaotic at 26%, and pandemic at 15%. In other words, of the 10 terms that people chose, the top 5 were the 5 negative terms we offered. Then each of the positive terms we offered got only 10 to 13%, improving, growth, hyperconnected, cooperation, or prosperity. In other words, the shares of people who describe the world as going in the right way are fairly small. What happens then if you try to aggregate these to get an overall sense? Well, what we found is that worry about the world is more frequent than expressing hope about it, led by almost 3 to 1. By worry, we mean that each of the 2 responses people could give were the negative ones. A mixed response was 1 negative and 1 positive, and a hopeful response was when people selected 2 of the 5 positive responses. And when we tabulate them this way, what did we see? Well, worry was expressed by 58% of people, almost exactly identical to the proportion saying the world is going the wrong way. Mixed responses were given by 23% and hopeful ones by only 20%. Again, very close to the proportion saying things were headed the right way. So it's a worried world, in other words. People don't spontaneously respond with positive reactions. They think it's dangerous, divided, and it is getting worse. Now, we also looked at how people differ in their responses on these issues. And we looked at three major differences. We looked at generation, we looked at gender, and we looked at geography. Let's take a look at what we found. First, by generation, we see that the under 40s, Generation Z or Z, and the millennials are consistently more positive than their elders. Now, on this slide, the blue bars represent the under 40s, Gen Z and millennials. The orange bars, the over 40s, Gen X and boomers like me. Here's the three pairs of bars. The first deals with the direction of the world, the proportion saying the world's headed the right way. As you see, it's almost twice as high for the under 40s, 39% compared to 23%. Then the second pair of bars is the proportions in each group who say the world is doing well on the issues. And here we took an average across the 9 different issue areas we asked them. When we did that, we found that on average, 50% of millennials said the world was doing well on a given issue compared to 35% of the over 40s. Lastly, we looked at the proportions who are worried about the state of the world. When we did this, we found that 44% of young people were worried about the state of the world compared to almost 70% of their elders, the over 40s. So young people are more positive. The elders who've experienced, perhaps because they've experienced more, are worried. We also see a big difference between the two country groups. In particular, the BRICS are much more hopeful than people in the developed world. On this slide, which shows the same 3 pairs of bars, the blue bars are people who live in the 5 BRICS countries. The orange bars are the people who live in the G7. And here what we see is that when it comes to saying the world's headed in the right direction, twice as many in the BRICS, 43%, as in the developed world, developed countries, 21%, say things are going the right way. That's really boosted heavily by large proportions saying right way in China and India. We see something similar when we average their scores on the world doing well on issues, 53% in the BRICS and 33% in the G7 countries say the world is doing well on average. And when we look at the state of the world, just under half are worried in the BRICS, whereas nearly 2/3, 65%, say they are worried about the state of the world in the G7 countries. So again, more hope among the young, more hope among the BRICS. How about by gender? Well, here, interestingly enough, we found that gender didn't make a big difference. It does on many issues, but not on the kind of global outlook issues we examined in this presentation. Thus, for instance, here, the same 3 pairs of bars, but blue is women and orange is men. When it comes to the world being in the right direction, the numbers are very similar. 28% for women, 32% for men. The world doing well on different issues, again, the averages are quite similar, 40% women, 43% men. And when it comes to the state of the world, both sexes are almost equally worried. 58% for women, 59% for men. So as I said, there are many issues on which there are gender gaps, but gender, when it comes to global outlook issues, does not seem to run across major fault lines. So what are the takeaways from the survey so far? Well, first off, global publics have their eyes on what's going on around the world. They have a broad awareness of what the state of the world is and what the key issues are. And broadly speaking, they think the world is going the wrong way, and most of them are worried about it. They are particularly concerned about war and conflict, about economic problems, and rising corruption. When we looked at specific issues, we also found widespread dissatisfaction with climate action, human rights, governance, conserving resources, and global cooperation. In fact, we found that global cooperation, leadership, action on climate and COVID and immigration are among the yardsticks used to measure how the world is doing. In other words, it's an awareness of global issues that leads to the use of those global issues to make judgments about the globe. Now, broadly speaking, the young and the BRICS are more optimistic on these issues, while gender gaps are pretty small. And as I said, there is some hope Because what we find is that the widespread global concern about these issues can offer a foundation for broad support for policies to address them. The results which we have to present in May will demonstrate how much support there is for action to address global problems. But for now, I'll stop here saying, yes, people recognize the world is in trouble, but that's a sign that they're concerned about the world, that they judge it, and that they're aware of global yardsticks, global events and developments. And just as that evidence about global problems is a genuine cause for concern, it also is an indication of how the world can get to a place where it can, where the publics, both the developed and developing worlds support action to address the world's problems.
Thank you, Craig. And I don't know if Azra, were you stepping in for our friend Sharuk in facilitating this discussion? I want to take somebody else's role away, but if not, I'm going to jump in with the first question.
No, by all means.
I think it's helpful for the group that is following this, and we're recording it. We're going to share with a lot of people, especially graduate students who might be interested in, if we can take a step back and just talk about the methodology, why qualitative methods matter. You know, for this weighty subject, shouldn't we be more focused on, this is a leading question, hard data and things? Yeah, we see all these composite measurement tool indices. My own background is in the Human Development Report, the Human Development Index. There have been many spin-offs from it. Isn't that far more useful for assessments, measurement of difficult subjects like what you're engaging in, global leadership, global cooperation? It sounds like your surveys cut across a whole range of issues that we're all concerned with, from environmental issues to war and peace to development challenges. But my first question is to tell us a little bit more about why measuring people's perceptions actually matters, and how you hope these results will be utilized. And then, if you don't mind, because I know it's a pretty big question, but tell us just a little bit more about the mechanics of how you rolled out this survey, given, you know, the vast subject matter. How do you zero in on just the questionnaire and stuff? How does that actually work for people that are interested in this kind of research tool, public perception surveys?
Sure. First off, on the nature of the research, this is hard data, Richard. It's quantitative, not qualitative. You know, first of all, if you look at the various demographic measures we use, whether it's gender, education, income, media access, and the like, those are all solid facts. Those are not perceptions. What we do try to do is understand how perceptions of issues vary according to nationality, geography, education, and so forth. But these perceptions are the essence of politics and the political foundations of how people perceive, how people understand their world. The reason why they're responding to war, to conflict, to the economy, to immigration, is not because of their imaginations. It's because these are the things that are affecting them and people in their communities and countries. In short, we're measuring where the shoe pinches, and that is hard data. What we're trying to find out is how people understand, based on their circumstances and those of their countries and communities, how they understand the problems in the world and which are the ones that particularly concern them. People in different places obviously feel different urgency. A place like Brazil, for example, or a place like China, war seems much more distant than it does in a place like Germany, separated by just one country from the current war in Ukraine. So what I would say is, if we want to understand the nature of both the levels of concern about what's happening in the world and in particular countries, and if we want to understand the yardsticks by which they measure what is going on in the world, we need solid quantitative data like this in order to do it. When it comes to the actual methodology, you know, the questionnaire was developed in conjunction with you and your colleagues at the Stimson Center to draw on your wealth of knowledge about global governance and the variety of issues that it touches upon. So we went through several iterations. We went through, some informal pre-tests, and then we gave it over to the translators because this 12 country survey was given in 13 different languages. We had native speakers check every language other than English, French, and Portuguese, which I was able to check. And we then worked with an excellent survey research firm, Tuluna. We'd set quotas based on population demographic data. And this gave us some benchmarks to see how the survey was turning out. After we'd done the first 50 or 60 cases in each country, we were able to adjust the sampling by quota to make sure it came close to the country totals. Then after we did that, we did a little bit of weighting, nothing, a nip and a tuck, not massive surgery, just to make sure that we were well representative of the different countries. And with that, it was time to start crunching numbers and looking at results.
Fantastic. And please, Azra, kindly introduce yourself. And Craig, if you can pull back to full screen, then we can see everybody more clearly
Sure,
on Zoom.
I'll stop sharing.
First of all, Craig, thank you so much for the lovely and very interesting presentation. I'm not.
Oh, you're in the
yes,
room. Okay,
yeah.
people can see you there. Sorry.
So thank you so much for the very interesting presentation. I'm actually collaborating with the Stimson Center. I'm a researcher, a PhD student. So thank you for going into the methodology. That was I was actually about to ask that as well. But my second question, something that sort of really caught my ear during the presentation was the fact that in the BRICS countries, there seems to be this public perception that the world is actually doing well on inclusive governments and human rights. And that is interesting to me, I mean, for a number of reasons, but in particular, I would say because Brazil, Russia, India, China at the moment aren't necessarily known for, I would say their human rights track record. And of course, I would argue even inclusivity, of course, in Brazil, if we look at indigenous communities, in India, of course, there are other factors, socioeconomic exclusion and ethnic exclusion and so forth. So I was just wondering, whether you were able to, or whether that was part of the plan to delve into these perceptions a little more. Perhaps why do you think that might be? Are these perceptions perhaps influenced by the official party line in these countries? Are they not? Just wondering how representative you think that is of the local population's perceptions, and also how that might relate to the sort of official politics of those countries.
Look, I think that the key factor in at least three of those countries, namely Brazil, India, and South Africa, is the fact that they are boisterous and lively multi-party democracies. Brazilians may feel a bit of comfort that they can keep their democracy. There are wobbles in all of them, as indeed there are in this country too. But there is a free press, a strong tradition of public debate, and a sense that there's choice. Russia and China are more difficult cases. In Russia, there is not a strong sense of inclusive governance. In China, it's difficult to tell to what extent we see conformity and to what extent we see people feeling there is genuine responsiveness. Because, the curious thing about the Communist Party government is that it both represses and responds when there's public discontent. So that is something one would need to delve into. We collected a lot of side data so that we can, in terms of both the other questions that we haven't released yet, the demographics, the media access, and the like. But we're hoping, eventually when we're finished with this data, that this will be made available to further researchers who can actually dig into those sorts of questions.
Thank you so much.
I am picking a few folks right now, and we'd love to hear from you, Hajar or Naveen or Queen, anybody online, please. This is an opportunity to ask questions and delve deeper into the amazing data set associated with the Global Governance Survey. Wow, you are collecting your thoughts. Craig, what was the biggest shocker? I know you might have made passing reference to it, but really going into what's something that you didn't expect at all when we were designing the survey and conceptualizing the whole project? And remind me, did we ask one of my favorite questions about the perceptions of an outside force, an alien force coming into our planet, Mother Earth, and how different countries from these major countries in the world that we're serving, how they responded to that one. Did you cover that ground?
We did. We asked the famous Reagan-Gorbachev question, but that's going to be part of what we release in May.
Oh, you don't want to preview it now?
No, I'd rather
Okay,
not.
okay.
But, I think the biggest surprises really had to do with India, China, and Russia, which are India, I mean, it is interesting to see how positive the responses are, although not that shocking given that Prime Minister Modi's ratings are in the 70 to 80% range. When it comes to China, it's a bit what I was just saying to Azaria, Azra,
Yeah.
which is that it's unclear what mixture of consent and fear is reflected in these results. When it comes to Russia, there are very interesting hints that things are not all hunky-dory. 50% say things are headed the right way there, 25% say they're not, and the other 25% say they're not really sure. And I think that means probably that the not sures are more in the no category than the yes category. So that's something that also I want to look at in much greater detail. But overall, the thing that was striking to me is that, India and China accepted on some of the issues. My computer is just running out of power.
Okay,
So I'm gonna
I
close
will
that.
I will be able to show you on this one.
Okay. But the thing that struck me is simply that there is a common set of yardsticks and a common set of views, common set of perceptions, but also a shared way in which people understand the world. And I think that is a very important observation, because that underlies what we'll be discussing in our next release, which is that there's a lot of common ground in the way people respond to global policy issues as well. And what that relates to is the fact that there are commonalities in the way they see and judge the world they are living in now.
Now, this is a funny question. Whoever raised their hand, because it has my name there, but it's not me. I didn't raise the hand function. So whoever did raise the hand function, please come in verbally. If you want to put on video, that's even, we'll be able to see you.
Oh, it says Jay, that's not you, Richard? Oh,
Hi,
There's
Richard.
the
It's me.
imposter, the other Richard.
Hi, Richard. I'm sorry I had to leave the room. I was trying to avoid any technical difficulties with the reverberation. But Craig, thank you so much for sharing the research. It's also very comprehensive and very important work now, because we need to consolidate or to be able to view different governance models next to each other. And I feel like the global governance survey that you have provided us with is a very, very integral step in taking us in that direction. I just wanted to ask, what would you say was perhaps, or is perhaps, one major limitation of this research? And I also want to know what's the way forward, because this is as a student of wanting to study comparative politics and governments, this is extremely exciting work. I almost want to begin asking you for access to some of this data for myself. So what's also the way forward, if you could share that with us as well?
the biggest limitation is the number of countries. I mean, there is a disproportion. For example, we have 7 developed countries and 5 developing. Again, we debated what was the best solution. We thought that was because these are 2 known blocks, but it also meant that we have more of one than of the other. Our ideal would be to go to the G20 as the next step, both because that's more representative and because that would create a better balance between developed and developing countries. It would also be nice if we could expand our sample size, say from 400 to 500 or 600, so we can slice and dice the individual countries different ways. And someone could play around with the data, especially if the samples were bigger, such that if you wanted to, you could actually give India and China their accurate population weights. Although you would end up then you would have a more accurate picture of the global population, but you basically have a China-India survey. So, a lot, some of the limitations are inherent in the nature of the problem. You have to make choices, and doing it one way means that you don't have the advantages and disadvantages of doing it another way. But, in surveys, bigger is usually better. And I hope we can get bigger.
And indeed, I'll show video here. Sharuk, you personally, as a member of the Global Governance Innovation Report team that's going to fully utilize this Global Governance Survey, also going to be developing a composite index that will draw upon the survey. We'll have access to the database soon, and then we hope to make it like public access. Parts of the data set, I understand, not every element of it, but much of it will be for general consumption, provided you cite the source. But yeah, we will be fully mining lots of insights. I see a friend, Melwish has just joined, although, yeah, if you've just joined, you're probably just learning about the survey. We'll let you learn some more. Key highlight takeaways are up on the screen, but feel free, any and all friends online. We have 20 minutes to go, and we really want to hear from as many of you who wish to ask questions about this survey or about doing survey work of this nature. This is a great opportunity to draw upon our speakers' decades of experience in this space. And let me ask, it's sort of methodological, but direct, like devil's advocate critique of such an instrument. Aren't we covering, from the data responses that you've already received from the respondents, isn't this too broad and expansive a subject matter to be? How are we going to weave a report out of this when it's not specifically on climate action issues as it relates to global institutions, the work of the UN? Many of us here, of course, in New York, physically for this Global Futures Forum, which is in a hybrid format, as you know, rather than choosing just one area, human rights, peace and security, poverty alleviation, the environment. We were covering everything in one survey. And did you sense that the survey partners in the 12 countries were really challenged, in covering such an expansive set of questions? And then secondly, we didn't just ask about those specific issues. We always related it back to our notion of global governance and global governance reform ideas. You spoke in several questions to key ideas that we're grappling with at this Global Futures Forum. Certainly Security Council reform related questions on G20, very powerful informal platform for major countries coming together with this institution down the street from us, the United Nations, and 193 member states. Wasn't it a bit of an overreach for one survey to not only cover the waterfront of major global cooperation issues today, and secondly, related back to institutional change, normative change, legal change? Is this something that you think maybe it's better if you break it down and compartmentalize and go into one silo, one specific sector of issues? Would that be more worthwhile in the future? Or do you see there's value in looking at these issues systemically and using a public perceptions tool as a way to understand global governance change writ large?
Well, we see this as the baseline survey for a 10-year project, a starting point. And since it is the baseline, we want to know where we're starting in a number of areas. So we began with the things you saw on the screen today in terms of the overall state of the world, and we also looked at the state of the countries. And that will probably be a fairly permanent module, because the idea is we'll track that from year to year in terms of satisfaction with local governance and the like. And when it came to the other problem areas that we looked at, which we'll be discussing in May, we tried to do a fairly broad survey to find out what the ideas and reactions of people were. We obviously didn't go into great depth on any of these, but we did try to hit many of the high spots. And that will enable us to track this in subsequent years, but not necessarily every year. But a year like this, for example, questions related to peace, war, and conflict resolution necessarily surged and had to be asked. Hard not to ask about climate, for that matter, or pandemic, or in particular pandemic prevention for the future, for a survey conducted in 2023. Some of the questions also are designed specifically to be inputs into your work in the Global Governance Report or the work of the Institute for Economics and Peace on the Global Governance Index. So those two are probably, some of those two will be tracked in the future. But I could easily see future years having many of the repeat questions, but many new ones as well, related to issues either that come up at that point or issues that we haven't covered this year. For example, the question of the global digital compact, and indeed the general relationship of people around the world to cyberspace and to digital governance. It might well be something we could look at in more detail in 2024. And who knows what's going to be at the top of the agenda in 2027. But this year, at least we'll be able to say, oh, well, this is what it looks like compared to 4 years ago.
In the last week, on everybody's mind, banking crisis. One of the banks that has now taken over by the US government in the US context is Signature Bank, had a lot to do with cryptocurrency investments and overextension. Of course, we know everything is linked to the interest rates going up. Did we, in this survey, look at, we designed this several weeks ago, if I'm not mistaken, in December and stuff, but we pick up on any of these global economic issues linked to the new economy, technology, you referred to, I think, cyber just now, but like AI, quantum computing. We get into any of these new frontier issues that you would hope global governance has something to do with management of these new technologies. Is that something we explore?
Not yet, but that may well be a topic for next year, particularly if there's more discussion of the Global Digital Compact. I mean, one of the interesting intellectual challenges in devising the questionnaire for us was starting from the starting point of what is global governance, and the definition we gave it, thanks to our friends at IEP, which is the management of global public goods and global commons. So when it comes to the regulation, the question of banking, for example, the question then becomes, what are the economic issues? Either could they be related to things like the G20 and its role in economic governance, or are there ways, for example, in which capital standards, which are largely informally governed by banks according to standards that are so-called Basel III capitalization standards, should be formalized or otherwise internationalized. When it comes to the question of the regulation of cyberspace, there are all sorts of interesting questions that will come up. I suspect they'll be part of the discussion of the digital compact or of elements that might be included in it. So if, for example, we look at that next year, which I'd be interested in doing, that might well be something we get into.
Just so people are aware, in about 10 minutes time, for those who have come on recently, this is the side events channel of the Global Futures Forum. And at 5:30 here in New York, the 6th in our series, the final of today's, is going to be on championing the Youth Declaration on Transforming Education. Strongly encourage everybody to stay on. We have with us, though, Craig Charney, who's introduced the Global Governance Survey. We're just talking about one of the topical issues of the day that, you know, just caught everybody's attention because it deals with your bank account and whether the economy is going to stay afloat in countries like the US and Switzerland. But we know these are big banks, especially Credit Suisse in Switzerland. The effects could be enormous. And I think the answer from Craig right now is that we didn't go into too much detail, but we're absolutely going to need to, because we want this to be very current. One of the issues that was on everybody's mind throughout the last 12 months, we marked the ominous 1-year anniversary of, is the war in Ukraine, Russia's aggression towards Ukraine, clear violation of the UN Charter and sovereignty, basic principles of why we created the UN back in 1945. So the question is, Craig, I know you don't want to maybe share the results at this stage. We want to keep our powder dry as we have the launch of this report, hopefully by the first week of May, and we'll be using it in the connection with this bigger study called the Global Governance Innovation Report by the end of June. So stay tuned to the work of the Global Governance Innovation Network, one of the key partners of this Global Futures Forum with the Coalition for the UN We Need, for more details on all these upcoming studies. But the question to Craig now is, did we not take pretty seriously in the peace and security pillar of this, the design of the Global Governance Survey, questions about Russia, its illegal actions towards the Ukrainian government and people? And yeah, can you at least share how challenging it was to deal with such a hot button issue, especially because we know you undertook this survey in Russia. So without giving all the results and details that you don't want to share at this time, tell us a little bit just about the challenges of doing such a survey on this hot button issue at this time.
One thing was that we had to be careful about our language. Thus, we referred to it as, in the Russian questionnaire, a special military operation. And, you know, we asked about not directly whether people supported or opposed the war, but rather what they thought were appropriate responses to the war. We found a surprising degree of international consensus on publics on these issues as well, without going into detail about it. We also were looking at questions like international arbitration versus the use of other means to settle disputes. And you know, I think what was interesting was seeing how there are different perspectives in different countries. And there was a consistent quarter or so of Russians who on the survey were willing to express dissent. And I suspect there may be more hidden dissent out there, but that will require a closer look at the data.
This is your chance, 8 minutes to go.
We'll be taking more questions. Any interventions, any comments that you may have, please raise your hand if you do so. And feel free to also unmute your mic and speak now.
Or forever hold your
Or
peace.
forever hold your peace.
And is it possible to do full screen? You want to keep the takeaways?
Do we want to keep the?
No, yeah, we can do full screen so they can. Well, I'll just show Craig this way. Craig, how you've had an illustrious career doing survey work, especially in fragile, conflict-affected states, in private sector in the U.S. What is this? Going back to our first questions, methodologies, design, some of the initial findings that we heard today, is this quite a different kettle of fish for you in this kind of industry of public perception, data collection? How has this compared to your previous work over the last few decades?
It is a first, and it's because connectivity has only recently become widespread enough to do meaningful research like this, particularly in developing countries. It still is difficult to find a good sample of the online population in very poor countries. For example, we did a survey a couple of years ago in Nicaragua, and we felt we had to do that by telephone rather than online because not enough people were online, whereas 80% had phones. On the other hand, in the countries that this survey is conducted in, 80% or more of people actually do have internet access. And we felt reasonably comfortable doing that. But that's something that's new. 5 or 10 years ago, we couldn't have done this.
You only did 12 countries. That's not even the G20. Why didn't you at least cover 20, if not 50 countries? Will you ever get to, we're here in New York, there's 193 member states. Is it your personal hope and ambition that we can have full coverage of the countries that exist and by definition, the world's full population?
Well, that would be great. As it is, I'd settle for the G20. If we can go from 12 countries to 20 and 24, I'd be very happy. That would be a win.
These countries, starting with Sharuk, by the way, who's here with us, and people from China will also say, hey, we have 1.4 billion too, although India is getting all the attention now. You're about to overtake them if you haven't already. How on earth can it be possible that you're getting a good representative sample of a country of 1.4 billion people with all its diversity that it entails can you please go over again the sample size and why random selection actually has shown and again and again? And also, I guess on this point, let's go a little deeper. What's your margin of error, especially vis-a-vis these massive countries?
Well, the sample size, the margin of error depends on the sample size rather than the size of the population. If you are trying to figure out whether soup is too salty, you only need a spoonful to do that, whether you are tasting a bowl or an enormous cauldron. And in this case, you know, the main limitation posed by a sample of only 400 is that you can't slice and dice it too much without your error margins getting very big. 400 is okay. That gives us plus minus 5%. On the other hand, men versus women is 200 per subsample. When we split it 4 ways, the error margin goes up to about 10%, and so forth. So, you know, you can't slice it too far, but you can get a general idea of what's going on, and that's what we're trying to do. The other thing you can do by aggregating the sample across the 12 countries is get a sense of what the international trends are. And that, I think, is new, and that I thought was interesting.
I know we're up on 3 minutes to go, so it's going to have to be a short answer as we transition to the next and final session in the side event series today here at the Global Futures Forum. Let me ask the big question that has been happening on sidelines during lunch, a dinner meeting that happened last night among many of the participants who've flown in to this event. And that is, you know, we're looking for leadership in the very least, some of the biggest, most powerful countries, those associated with G20. It has a lot to do with the countries that were selected for this survey. And we couldn't help but reflect that again and again, you know, even a great country like Germany, under almost 16 years of Angela Merkel and her leadership, and then now it's Chancellor Scholz, but they're so, they have their hands tied in terms of incentives to be an enlightened global leader. That's a major, powerful democratic country like Germany. And yet, aren't the results that you shared today saying that people in these countries who are going to be expected to step up and pay more and put life on the line in terms of peacekeepers and, you know, take more serious concern for action from climate, human rights, the whole gamut of issues that you covered, is it even more stark now that we don't have a global system of governance that incentivize people, governments and leaders to contribute to global public goods, to global action in alignment with what their people want? Are you seeing people saying we need obvious action, partly because it's in our direct self-interest, but it's also the values that you're seeing? As a new global generation emerging that's out of sync with the incentives of political leaders of nation states today?
Yes,
Tough question to end on. You have 1 minute.
I think we are seeing the emergence of shared global concerns. And with that, I think we're seeing the emergence of a global willingness to act. One of the things that people have discussed in the foreign policy sphere as difficult is how to manage a situation which is great power competition, but also a need for cooperation. It seems to be that many of these spheres of global governance may offer potential grounds for cooperation. They offer a possibility, in fact, to find some ways that can wind down tensions, even as geopolitical rivalries, which are real and which exist, may tend to augment them. These seem to me to offer possibilities for coexistence and for progress. Perhaps that's something that can counterbalance some of the division and conflict.
Thank you so much for your time, Dr. Charney. We wish you the best of luck, both for the sake of our partnership together, but no, for the issues that are extremely important, grave, we need the world to act on, and they were very much reflected in the results of this survey. So I hope those watching and those who will watch the videos of each of these sessions got a taste today, and we'll keep an eye out for the Global Governance Survey to be brought out in full form in May, and we'll hope to make the data sets available for those doing research in this space. Back to you, my colleague Sharuk.
Thank you so much. I would like to thank Mr. Craig Charney, Dr. Poncio, Charney Research for giving us this session. I'm very excited to see how far this research goes. I'm very excited to be able to use and play with some of that data myself while I'm with the GGI.